Here we go. Here we go. Recognition of individual capacities. Does the student have study habits based on past education? It's very important that study habits be in place the first evening students leave the classroom. Many students will not have study habits to rely on. The QI must give the student a comprehensive plan to get through the material in a proper time frame. Students are required to complete portions of the course outside of the classroom. You need to pay attention to reading ability. Students who do not read well may not tell you. The QI must pay close attention to a student's ability to read practice questions accurately and take steps necessary to facilitate the patient reading of practice questions. It's important that practice questions are read accurately. Pay attention to mathematical ability with special attention to the concept of time. Students who have little experience with mathematics generally struggle during the chart navigation module of the captain's license course. The concept of time must be given special attention. When we study time, it's hours to minutes, minutes back to hours, and the units at the end get confusing. You ask a student, they're like, oh, 0.67. You're like, what? 0.67 what? 0.67 hours? 0.67 minutes? 0.67 apples? You know? If there's no units, you don't know what time it is. You don't know what you're looking at. Pay attention to how fast students fatigue when studying. Mental and physical fatigue play a role in how long a student can focus on the task at hand. Students who are not accustomed to studying for multiple hour sessions will fatigue mentally much faster than a college student who has years of practice. Students who are not in good physical condition will fatigue and become uncomfortable due to sitting in the same position for long periods of time. So will any student, whether not physically fit or physically fit. If you sit in the same position for a long time, especially during chart nav when you're hunched over your chart, it starts to get uncomfortable. This is very apparent during the chart navigation portion of the course, when students must hunch over a chart for 2 days. Their backs can give out and it becomes very uncomfortable to chart. Watch for signs of frustration. Frustration is the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of inability to change or achieve something. Most students will be frustrated with some aspect of the course at some point. Identify the root of the student's frustration and realize the QI could be the root of it. Give a frustrated student room to breathe and struggle through the topic on their own terms. The QI may recommend a short break from the topic and a walk around the premise to clear their head. Another tactic that may be beneficial to a student who is frustrated with the QI is to get a peer to help the student understand the information in the topic. Watch for signs of self-defeat. Self-defeating behavior is defined by behavior where people knowingly do things that will cause them to fail or bring them trouble. One type of trade-off is known as self-handicapping. In the trade-off, people will deliberately choose to do something that they know will harm them, so that if they fail later, they're able to blame their failure on the bad choice they previously made. Another category of self-destructiveness includes counterproductive strategies. This type of behavior is one in which the person neither desires nor foresees the harm to self. In this instance, a person is pursuing a desirable outcome but chooses a strategy or approach that backfires and produces the opposite of the desired result. Thus, the person is pursuing a positive goal, but the person's method of pursuing is counterproductive. This type of behavior is very common among young adults and usually results in some kind of self-harmful outcomes. Reasons for self-defeat. People are more likely to behave in a self-defeating or destructive manner when either there are threats made to their ego or when they have low self-esteem. When a person has a low self-esteem, they're more likely to be susceptible to having depression, anxiety, and emotional distress, which are problems that are usually directly related to a less unfavorable self-appraisal. Emotional stress has also had a link to self-defeating behavior. Anecdotal observations have long suggested that highly distraught people are more likely than others to be to do self-destructive things. Also, self-regulation failure is yet another supposed cause of self-defeating behaviors. One's self-regulation is related mostly to one's self-control. Self-regulation allows a person to prepare themselves for a certain situation and adapt to that situation. With self-regulation, a person can either make sure they succeed or fail in a certain situation. Self-regulation is presumably one of the major capacities that the human self has evolved in order to help bring about positive outcomes. When the self brings about negative outcomes, therefore, one could readily suspect that self-regulation has failed in some crucial way. Ultimately, self-defeating behavior may often result from the failure of the self to regulate behaviors properly. Self-defeating behavior is a very interesting phenomenon that happens in the classroom. And it's basically the only people that fail our course are the ones that stop trying. They essentially self-defeat themselves. They just stop. We don't have any time limits. The courses don't expire. You get as long as you want. So we'll have, a lot of times maybe life will get in the way, right? Maybe 3 years later, someone's like, oh, wow, I was taking care of my parents, but now I'm back at captain's licensing, and they can just jump back on board and they can keep going through the course. We've had students that 5 years later, they come back and complete the course, and we just make sure their accounts are okay. But that's not self-defeating. I've had one student in particular. He was full of anxiety and stress, but he could do ChartNav, and he could work through the problems, and he could figure it out. But then he would go in the parking lot, and he would take his medication, and he'd come in, and 15 minutes later, he's super chill, but he could no longer work through the problems. His memory got messed up by his medication. So he had two choices. He could stick it out and be anxious but get through everything, or he would go in the parking lot, medicate himself, and then come back in and not be anxious but not be able to do the problem sets. So this is behavior. This is self-defeating behavior. And another way I see it is I have people call, and they call me and try to turn me on, they try to turn me against instructors we have working with us. They'll call and they'll say, oh, this guy said don't do this because I'm not ready, so don't even take this and don't do this and that and the other. And I'll call the instructor, and they will tell me, oh no, they gave him a piece of great advice. It just basically said, work harder, study more, you'll get ready for the test. But right now, you might not be ready. So a simple piece of advice that is wise and sound, but the student will twist it and then try to use it against that instructor and try to turn people against each other and point blame and share blame about why they can't do it. So really what it comes down to is the reason the students can't do it is because they give up due to self-defeating behavior. And it's one of the more interesting and profound things I've ever seen students do is self-defeat themselves until they give up. Watch for very large learning capacities of highly intelligent individuals. Challenge highly intelligent students to a reasonable extent by asking them to work with students having trouble with the material. Keep a close eye out for frustration or contempt in this situation. Do not make the learning process unpleasant by forcing this situation. So if you see a student that is really good with the material and they just blast through it, and then they're going on to the next part, sometimes you can take that student and you can pair them with a slower student, and the student who is very quick with the information will set in even deeper because they're teaching it to a slower student. So it's kind of a twofer. You got your super intelligent student that's blasting through information, learning that information more, and likewise, the slower student is getting a grasp of the information because the student who's fast with it is explaining it to him or her.